from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
You're listening to and watching Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale. It's just gone 1 minute past 8. And for the next hour, joining me on the panel this evening are Silkie, Carlo, the director of Big Brother Watch. Also on my left is Shailesh, Vara, the Conservative MP. To my right is Sian Berry, former co-leader of the Green Party and also a Green prospective parliamentary candidate. And Charlie Rowley, who is a former advisor to both Theresa May and Michael Gove. So many things you might want to ask. You might want to touch on what we were just talking about in terms of who do you trust more now on crime and prisoners and prisons and all of that stuff. Also, the fact that teachers are to be banned from teaching any sex education. Well, at least the suggestion is they shouldn't teach any sex education to any kid who's under 9 years old. And the policing minister wants the police to use stop and search again to get knife crime down. What do you think of all this? Get your calls in 0345 6060 973. And also, don't forget to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And let's get to our first question, which is a text question from Sophie in Hull. Is Rishi Sunak really keeping Britain safer and more secure when dangerous criminals are being let out of jail early? Shailesh, Vara.
Well, first of all, a very good evening to you, Ali, and all your listeners. I think Rishi Sunak is doing a great job in keeping Britain safe and all the people in the United Kingdom. First and foremost, he has made a commitment that by 2030, the government will be spending 2.5% of GDP towards defence, and over the next 6 years, there's going to be an additional £75 billion going towards the defence that we're talking about. And as far as releasing prisoners early is concerned, let me be absolutely clear. This is only for certain prisoners who have been vetted and who are not going to be causing difficulty or committing dangerous crimes when they're released. So if you're serving a life sentence or you've committed for a certain other very serious offences, you're not going to be on that scheme. Of course, those who are opponents of the Conservative Party would like to muddy the waters and talk otherwise. But let's be clear, it's a scheme on which only people who can be trusted to be out there will be released, and UK is going to be a whole lot safer as the world gets dangerous.
So why did Sir Keir Starmer pull the Prime Minister up and say that there is going to be at least one individual who has posed a danger to children in the past who is going to be let out early under this scheme?
I don't know the circumstances of one particular case when we are talking about thousands and thousands of cases. All of us are human beings, and mistakes can sometimes be made. In this case, I hope it is. There are very good reasons, and if it is the case, then something will be done.
But isn't it embarrassing that we've got to a situation where there simply aren't enough spaces in prisons right now because the 20,000 additional prison places were not built in time, and Alex Chalk is flailing around now in a situation where the Tories, for heaven's sake, are going to have to let prisoners out early?
Well, I think we have to recognise that if we want people to contribute to society post-prison, then first and foremost we have to have prisons which have proper facilities, and the Conservative government is investing £4 billion to make sure that the prisons are refurbished and extra blocks are built for another 4,000 prisoners. It's anticipated that there'll be 19,000 more prisoners by the sort of 2025, 2026, and that's going to be as a consequence of 20,000 extra police officers out there and more targeting and catching criminals a whole lot more. So as far as your issue is concerned, I think we need to recognise that Britain is, or the government is doing a whole lot more to keep the streets safe.
Silkie, is Rishi Sunak really keeping Britain safer and more secure?
Well, clearly not. And there's no greater failure, really, of a government than to fail at protecting law and order, especially when you're supposed to be the party of law and order. And they've had 14 years to introduce all the reforms they could have thought of and clearly have failed. The prisons are now overwhelmed and overcrowded. That means that the people who are in there can't be rehabilitated. You can't be prepared to reintegrate and into normal life and contribute to society when you're in a drug-filled environment dictated by violence that's overcrowded, where you're mistreated. And that's the situation that we currently have, let alone the fact that crime is still a serious issue out on the streets as well, let alone what's just going on in prisons. I mean, people know that police do not attend, and often the criminal justice system does not prosecute violent offenders and other people. So there's a sense of lawlessness in the country. And I think that, you know, the problem I have with the Labour Party is that I don't really know if I want to see a party that's got a vision for really sorting this out. It needs a root and branch overhaul. To be honest, I think the Metropolitan Police probably needs a root and branch overhaul as well. You need to start from the bottom up with the whole thing. So many people bouncing in and out of prison for those short sentences. The reoffending rate is astronomical. And people are bouncing in and out of the system, coming back and reoffending. Lots of people with drug and drink issues who would be much better off in rehabilitation services than in prison, mental health services and all the rest of it. But the current system is completely and utterly broken.
You do not sound convinced by Labour at all, Silkie. Shabana Mahmood, the Shadow Justice Secretary, has talked about building these extra 20,000 prison places and using the existing budget of $4 billion to do it. Are you buying the Labour plan?
To me, it sounds a lot like management consultancy kind of language. It sounds like management. It doesn't sound like vision and leadership. It doesn't sound like a true grasping of the scale of the problem that the country really faces. And I'm not really hearing anything about brave decisions to have meaningful overhaul.
Okay.
That's what we need.
Not
just an extension of resources and overhaul.
We were not seeking to cause offence to management consultants on this programme this evening. Sian Berry.
Yes, this whole criminal justice system is an incomplete mess, and it is down to the Conservatives who have been in government for the last 14 years. The prison population is so overcrowded. There's absolutely no hope that those people are getting the help that they need to become good citizens when they come out. They're just making people worse, and they're costing a fortune in the process, because keeping people in prison is very, very expensive. And you could be spending the money on prevention. You could be spending the money on ways to do probation differently. And the other thing that's happened this week is people who are about to go to court have had their court cases put off, and they're being released on bail because there aren't the prison places if they get found guilty. Now, imagine being a victim of crime in those circumstances, when you've waited for maybe years for your case to come to court. You're waiting to come and be a witness, maybe relive the crime all over again, and that is being put off. And the perpetrator that you know, I'm not saying all these people are guilty, but if you're the victim and you know that person is guilty, they might be released on bail. This is a horrific situation.
Well, they won't be released on bail at the moment because there's no guarantee that they can be held on remand in a prison. There are no prison cells.
Well, that's exactly what's happened this week. There's lots of this going on. And what we have said in the Green Party is that the Home Office is too big. It needs to be broken up. Yes.
So you're with Robert Jenrick. This is breaking news. Breaking news on Cross Question, my friend.
This exact thing put forward recently by Robert Jenrick, because it is something the Greens
you think it's too unwieldy?
Have been saying for a very, very long time.
You think it's too unwieldy?
I mean, we would perhaps put the purposes of the different broken up parts of it differently, but we would want to have a crime prevention ministry that was also able to invest in things like youth services, things like rehabilitation services, education within prisons. You don't have to have such a long sentence if you're doing rehabilitation while somebody's in there.
Charlie.
Well, yes, the week that Natalie Urfitt gets brought into the Labour Party, you're welcoming Robert Jenrick to the Greens. That is extraordinary.
I think we might disagree about the book.
Good ideas come from anywhere, Charlie. Good ideas come from anywhere. Go on.
They all generate from LBC.
But it is too big. The Home Office.
But you've been in government, so you've got it'll be interesting to hear your perspective.
Well, I do, but I don't want to sound too contradictory. But there are two things here. There are too many people that are in prison that shouldn't be in prison, and I think that's what everybody is saying, because there are too many people that go to prison who come out even more hardened criminals who should have not gone to prison, because there should have either been prevention work that took place before they were even able to get into the criminal justice system, or the rehabilitation in another setting before even facing a court trial. So we've got too many people in prison that shouldn't be in prison, which is why I think if you are currently in prison and you've committed what is deemed a low-level offence, to free up places for people that should be there for those hardened criminals, at a time where we don't have enough prison places, where we haven't built the prisons, that's something that the government will need to address. You need to free up the room. And I think 17 days of people that are low-level crime to complete their sentence a little bit earlier, if you're on the lower end of the criminal spectrum, isn't such a bad idea. But the answer directly to the question, are we letting dangerous prisons, or is the government letting out dangerous prisons, for the reasons that Shailesh has said earlier on? Absolutely not.
Charlie, I can't believe I'm hearing a former Tory advisor saying that too many people are going to prison, and then I've got Sian Berry telling me that Robert Jenrick's right. I don't know what's happening tonight. Sian, come back.
The other thing on that is that, are these people being released with any support? A lot of the work I've been doing, I worked in the London Assembly until very recently.
Absolutely.
A lot of the work I was doing was working with women who are leaving prison with literally no support. Often they've lost their homes. And so are we releasing people into society again with literally no support? Because that is another thing that leaves them vulnerable to exploitation and carrying on doing further crimes. There needs to be money behind this.
That's a good point.
But it also becomes a revolving door. We're not talking about thousands of new people or hundreds of new people committing new crimes that need to go to prison. Often it's the same people that face the criminal justice system. It becomes a revolving door where the people in prison don't get the support that they need, but but then, if you've committed a lower-level crime and go to prison and you come out an even more hardened criminal, that's a problem. That shouldn't happen. So that's why we just need to get that balance right between the people that can come out of prison early by about 17 days for low-level crime to be reformed, to not go back into the prison system, versus people that do need to go to prison that are hardline criminals.
Shailesh.
All the criticism that we've had with 14 years of government, can I just say crime is down 55%. Crime is down 55% since 2010, except for fraud. And in London, a Labour mayor in the past year, knife crime has gone up 20%.
He still got elected.
He did get elected, but when you have West Streeting sending out tweets calling the Tory party racists and whatever and so on, which frankly, given that the Prime Minister is a man of Indian origin, and you've got...
Well, that doesn't give him a free pass. I mean, I had Samuel Kasuma on the programme last night. He was saying that you can't hide under the fact that just because the Tories have got a very ethnically diverse cabinet, which was very good, and Shailesh, you and I have been following politics for many years, and you were one of the first, one of the highest profile candidates in the Tory party back in the day in 2005 when you got elected. Doesn't mean it's a free pass so there's no racism in the Tory party, does it?
No. Look, I'm not saying there's no racism at all, but what I am saying is there's a hell of a lot less than in any other parties. I mean, Labour, anti-Semitism, let's not just go there. Jeremy Corbyn has a word to say
I think
about
Starmer would argue that he's done a lot to sort of negate that.
Just one other point. In terms of rehabilitation, I mean, I think it's vital that we have systems to do that, because it's important that people go back into society and are able to contribute, and that is an important aspect. But in terms of dirty tactics and whatever, I mean, playing the race card, I think that's just bang out of order, and frankly, we need to move on.
Silkie, your thought?
Well, coming back to the issue, I wanted to raise IPP sentences, indeterminate sentences for public protection, which are literally indeterminate sentences. So there are around 3,000 people who are in prison, some of which are in prison for offences as minor as stealing a mobile phone, who are languishing in prison, never know when they're going to get out. This whole system was abolished over 10 years ago, but there are still thousands of people in prison under these sentences. That needs to be sorted out right now. That could be sorted out very quickly. Free up these places. The people who are affected by this, there have been 2,000 cases of self-harm, 9 suicides last year. It's seriously bad for people's mental health. So there are all these kind of really simple things, as well as the big complex issues with the criminal justice system that are overdue in being dealt with.
Thank you very much, Silkie. You can see that this got off to a quite sparky start here with the panel this evening, and also some strange consensus breaking out across the political divide, which I didn't expect, and I've already offended management consultants, so there you go. If you want to get your calls in, you know what to do. 0345 6060973, text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. Listening to Ali Miraj in for Indale on LBC. This is Cross Question. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
Ali Miraj on Cross Question in for Ian Dell. I hope you're watching us on Global Player. It's 8:18. I'm joined by Silkie, Carlo from Big Brother Watch, the Conservative MP Shailesh, Vara, Sian Berry from the Greens, and also Charlie Rowley, former Conservative advisor. Sian, just before we go on, you won the election to the London Assembly, but then decided to stand down. Why?
I'm very sad to stand down. I've been a London Assembly member for 8 years, and this switchover should have happened on the night of the election, but essentially we were aiming to increase our numbers to 4. Zoe Garbett was our fantastic candidate for mayor. I mean, she really did engage with Londoners. She got 145,000 votes for mayor. She had an absolute mandate to be on the Assembly.
But why not stand down before?
She was our 4th candidate. So if we had 4, then I wanted to work with Zoe because she's amazing. Okay. With only 3, it was a really hard thing to say, you know, that Zoe should wait until the general election, which we should have had ages ago. And it just seemed like the right thing for me to go and not take up the seat. But why stand
at all? Why not just stand down before?
Because we don't know when the general election is going to be, and this was my job, and I really appreciate the opportunity to make changes to policy, and a lot of the work we do is focused on government policy. So stopping that unnecessarily early wouldn't have been good.
And you're now standing
down for Zoe was an absolute.
And you're standing in Brighton Pavilion now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. As a candidate. Okay, next question. Martin in Doncaster. Martin, good evening.
Hello, Ali and panel. Yeah, my question is it a record to be proud of when over 3 million food parcels have been handed out on Rishi Sunak's watch?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, indeed, Martin. So 3 million food parcels handed out on Rishi Sunak's watch. Record to be proud of, says Martin. Let me just give you a bit of background here. The charity, the Trussell Trust, which runs a network of food banks, says it handed out 3.1 million food parcels between April of last year and March of this year. It also said that demand for food parcels has almost doubled over the last 5 years. Sian?
Yeah, we've all seen the evidence of this in the brilliant work that the Trussell Trust does in counting up the number of food parcels that are put out, but also just in our local communities. I'm spending all my time now in Brighton, as you say, meeting different groups, helping in the community, and so many of those groups are helping people with essentially the cost of living, and it's people coming together and helping each other to purchase food cooperatively, to work with local businesses so that surplus food doesn't go to waste. These are fantastic projects. They're not even included in those figures. There are people all across the country just struggling to get by, and the Conservative government is absolutely 100% responsible for this. You could eliminate that kind of poverty just by increasing the amount that you give to people in welfare benefits, but also you can't punish children for the fact that their parents can't find work when we've had a pandemic, when we've had austerity stripping out the kinds of jobs people can do in local authorities, and we've had global pressures as well, and not to mention a massively chaotic fiscal event under one particular Prime Minister. These are all things that have harmed people's ability to live, that's harmed people's ability to get by on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think the Tories
they are responsible for this, and it could be ended. Nobody should be relying on
Do you
charity.
think the Tories are being mean by actually trying to clamp down on benefits which are going through the roof and are set to increase, by actually trying to get people who have got certain conditions back to work to do something that they can do rather than focus on what they can't?
I think in the situation that we are in, the announcements that were made a couple of weeks ago that they were going to once again crack down on supposed benefit fraud was the most tone-deaf thing I've ever heard. It's absolutely wrong. And from Silkie's point of view, the very idea that they're starting to wave around facial recognition to go and spy on people who might be working, the expense of doing that when you could just simply make sure that people have enough to live on.
Charlie?
Well, nobody wants to hear about the story of somebody going to, whether it's a food bank or going to seek, help from your community. But, there is a problem here, where the economy has taken a knock. If you take COVID, for example, there's been a £400 billion bill that needs to be paid. The cost of living, which is essentially the question of what you're asking, has to be addressed, and that's what the government's trying to do. Inflation is coming down. It has to grow the economy. The government will say that there are more people in work than ever before. Unemployment is at its lowest.
4.5%.
4.5%, and it's legislated for a national living and minimum wage, which is always increasing. So it has done the kinds of things that you'd expected you to help with the cost of living at a time when it came into an office where there was a little note that was left that said there is no money left. So I think, look, you've got to take things as you see it. It's just a harsh reality that there will always be people, I think, that will need additional help and support. It's right to help those people. But I don't think you can constantly do that when you've got a growing debt, when you've got higher taxes, and when the economy isn't growing. So I think the policies that the Conservatives have pursued and achieved are going to help in some way. But of course, you don't want to hear people relying on food parcels.
Silkie, 2.5 trillion of public debt, 400 billion of borrowing on the back of COVID, a furlough scheme. The government has done a lot, hasn't it? Is it all down to the government to be responsible for people who are going to food banks?
Yeah, of course it is. I think a lot of the COVID spending was ridiculous, and the government dug an absolutely massive hole for itself. But here we are. You draw the line at hungry children. That is the line. And teachers are telling politicians that they have children coming into school who haven't had breakfast, who are clearly hungry. That's a crisis. 3 million food parcels, emergency food parcels, handed out is a crisis. Sian's absolutely right about the issues that we've got with the welfare system and how kind of cruel and punishing it's become, rather than a lift up to get back into work or back into society, or to be able to just look after yourself if you can't do those things for whatever reasons. At the moment, the universal credit amount is, I think, £85 a week. I will believe that this is a fair system when a group of MPs, Conservative MPs, if there are any volunteers, accept £85 a week to live on, because I expect they spend £85 an evening in a bar, and it's simply not possible. In fact, isn't it the case that the
wouldn't
daily...
restrict that to just Tory MPs, I must say.
But hang on, hold the people making the decisions to account. That's what I'm saying. Isn't it the case that in the House of Lords there's a daily allowance for £200 to £300, up to £360 per day, and you've got people who are carers, single mums, parents who are trying to live on £85 a week? It's not possible. People are being set up to fail. And then people are wondering why we've got high crime rates, shoplifting, health problems. This is part of a whole system, a cycle of disadvantage where people are being set up to fail.
Silkie, what is the ask on the part of the government, though? Because governments also always have to make choices. There are multiple demands. I mean, whether it be defence, the NHS, I mean, there's a 7 million waiting list, all sorts of people going on strike. What would you do? What would your recommendation be? Shailesh is sitting here. He's got a vote in Parliament. He's one of those Tory MPs. You want to live on 85 quid a day and try and do it. What is your message?
£85 a week?
£85 a week, sorry.
The message is, if you're going to do welfare reforms, start with making sure that kids aren't hungry, and make sure that people have enough to live on. There is a cost of living crisis. Middle class people are struggling. People up and down the country are struggling. But people who are on the poverty line and living in poverty in particular are struggling so much that they are now homeless and hungry. It's like a third world country. It's absolutely embarrassing.
I think Marcus Rashford, that whole free school meals thing that he dug in on and actually got his way with the government, actually, you could say, was down to a lot of this. Shailesh?
Well, could I just first of all say that I think it's rather sad that all Tories are branded as being rich. As somebody who came to this country at the age of 5 and couldn't speak a word of English and went to a primary school in inner city Birmingham and throughout has had his education in the state sector and a Red Brick University, and through sheer hard work got to where I am. I think perhaps we need to reappraise that there are poor people and not so poor people in all parties.
I didn't say you were rich. You're on 85 grand a year, and you're putting people in UC on £85 a week, but you're misrepresenting what I said.
Okay, Silkie, come back in a second.
Allow me the courtesy to have my say in the same way that I allowed you the courtesy.
Yeah, we'll come back.
I'm not interrupting you.
We can come back.
I mean, if you look at people like Peter Mandelson and their lifestyle, as well as others. But the issue is about food banks. I mean, first of all, can I just say a huge thank you and huge praise for members of the community, church groups and the like, who run the food banks and other areas where they give help to those who are needy. I have to be, we have to be realistic, and Charlie's touched on this. There have been tough times recently. The pandemic really caught, there's no A to Z book on a bookshelf that you pick up as to how to handle a global pandemic.
There's a huge amount of wastage, though, Shailesh. Come on, VIP lanes.
I mean, look, as I said, there was no A to Z
of course.
Of how to handle a global pandemic. But as far as the excessive expenditure is concerned, I take issue with Silkie on that as well. Furlough payments, there's a lot of people out there, millions of people who are grateful that they were able to keep their jobs. As far as grants to business is concerned, those people would have gone completely under. Lifetime's work building up family businesses, they would have been finished if it weren't for business helps. As the transport system was kept going and all of that. But as far as the food banks are concerned, there's been a massive impact because of the Ukraine-Russian war. Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. It supplied food for 600 million people in Europe.
Started before
that's all
that.
gone.
Come on.
No. But we had the pandemic before that. So the pandemic had...
Okay, so we haven't had any relief, is the point you're making.
We've had the Ukraine-Russian war. 600 million people relied on food from Ukraine. That's gone. We've had energy prices going up because of all the consequences of the war. So... That being said, the government has, we've got the record level living wage that's increased. Universal credit, before the Tories came in, there was a disincentive. If you reached a certain amount of level to earn money, it simply wasn't worth going to work because it benefited. Universal credit had a tapered system, and I was a minister in DWP and helped take through some of the legislation. So it's a good system.
Thank you, Shailesh. Silkie, quickly, then I'm going to bring back Sian. Go on.
Yeah, I don't think listeners who can hear for themselves will appreciate you misrepresenting what I said. Also, let me point out, I grew up on free school meals. I know the system very well. I know what it's like to grow up in a family where there is real anxiety about the cost of living and about making ends meet and about getting food on the table and things like that. This is too serious to misrepresent each other about. And it's also too serious when there are 3 million emergency food parcels being handed out for the government to introduce mass bank spying now for people in the welfare system. So now the government has said that all of the nation's bank accounts are going to be monitored, looking for people in receipt of welfare to see if they've got too much in a bank account, etc., etc. People are being treated as though they are criminals, and it's not fair. The whole system, people are being set up to fail and now being spied on.
We'll come back to that. We may come back to that. So, Sian?
I mean, as always, tax evasion, people not paying the taxes they should, far outweighs any kind of benefit fraud. And we do need massive reforms to the benefit system. At the moment, Labour are not saying they're going to remove even the 2-child limit on benefits. We've still got an awful system of sanctions. We've got disabled people feeling punished on a regular basis and being reassessed and having to go through all kinds of bureaucracy. There is an awful lot that can be done to improve the welfare system, but in the end it's fairer taxes, a more progressive tax system that will help to pay for this, and we're not afraid to say so.
A very robust discussion happening so far. You're listening to Ali Miraj in for Ian Dale on Cross Question. It's 8:30 and the news time for the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The Slovakian Prime Minister's condition has been described as extraordinarily serious after he was shot 5 times during an assassination attempt. The country's defence ministers told reporters Robert Fico is still in surgery after being flown to hospital. A former Justice Secretary has told LBC there's not been enough emphasis on the justice system over the last 2 decades. Robert Buckland has been speaking to LBC as the government introduces emergency measures to tackle overcrowding in prisons. And a man's been arrested and is now being treated under police guard following a suspected gas explosion in Cornwall. The 46-year-old is in hospital with life-changing injuries after it happened at a home in Drake Walls on Sunday. LBC weather: patchy rain for eastern England as well as central and southeastern Scotland tonight. Mostly dry elsewhere and a low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
Ali Miraj in for Ian Dale on Cross Question. It's 8:34. Joining me this evening is a real stellar panel. Silkie Carlo joins me from the director, well, she is the director of Civil Liberties at the campaign group Big Brother. Silkie, it's very good to have you here. You're campaigning on many, many things. One of the things I wanted to ask you about very briefly was AI. It's a huge issue. What's your view? Are you worried about it infringing civil liberties?
Yes, absolutely, and about it eroding human principles, about life becoming overly securitized and bureaucratic, about all of our data being ingested by machines and spewed back at us, especially when this goes into policing and the criminal justice system, the welfare system as well, actually. We are seeing the birth of a kind of citizen scoring using AI as well in some of these cases.
Sounds very dystopian and very highly disturbing. Shailesh Vara also joins me. He's a Conservative MP for North West Cambridgeshire. I've known Shailesh for a very long time. It's very good to see you, Shailesh. It's been a long time, been a while. One of the things I wanted to ask you is you're campaigning for safer schools for children with allergies. What's this about?
Well, I had a question at Prime Minister's Questions last week on this, and we all know that over the past 30 or so years, more and more coverage is being given to people suffering from allergies. When I was growing up, it wasn't an issue. And the extraordinary fact is that in an average class, 2 children will be suffering from food allergy. And allergy reactions happen more in schools than in any other place other than the home. And yet we don't have any explicit legislation telling schools to have proper policies.
That's fair.
And that's important. Schools are not obliged to have an allergy policy for children. Yep. They're not obliged to have medication. And medication is very simple. It's just one of these adrenaline pens. Yep. But, you know, I'm campaigning to change that, and it follows a tragic death of a little boy, Benedict Blythe, in my constituency.
5 years old.
5 years old, died in primary school in my constituency. There's coroner's inquest yet to decide, but I think this is an area twofold, and is that one, we need to get some concrete and solid ideas as to how to deal with it. But secondly, greater awareness for the public as to how to deal with people and support them.
Okay, very good. And very important. Sian Berry from the former co-leader of the Green Party and also Conservative... Conservative. Wash your mouth out, Miraj. Green Party prospective parliamentary candidate for Brighton Pavilion. So sorry, Sian. That's going to go viral.
That's okay.
Sian, you wrote a book some years ago entitled Junk for Joy on upcycling.
I did.
Well, can you explain this briefly?
I love this. I still do this. I've been doing it this week. Yes, it's really important that people who work a lot, you know, in professions like ours, where the truth is a matter of opinion often, work with our hands and do things like, you know, upcycling stuff that you find on the street, mending things, making things, where, you know, if you've got it right, the material, the thing will tell you whether or not you've got it right. And I think it's really, really good for you to be doing that, and I encourage many people to do it.
Super. And Charlie Rowley, former advisor to Theresa May when she was Prime Minister, and also Michael Gove when he was Levelling Up Secretary. Charlie, you ran for Police and Crime Commissioner. When was this?
I was going to say, I've not been campaigning for anything. I've got no claim to any.
Go on, just briefly.
I was in the running to be selected to be the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire, because I thought, actually, that role is something that is... not well known about, and should be, because it's such an important role, because you as an elected person, whatever your party, to be the voice of dealing with crime and helping the community to actually, you know, get people off the street, or whatever it is.
Of course.
I think it's a role that's undervalued and not well known about, and I was trying to become the candidate to try and make Hertfordshire even safer, but to put them on the map.
Good for you. Good for you. Next question is from Darren in Edmonton. It's a text question. Can police really be trusted to use stop and search fairly? A bit of background here. The Policing Minister, Chris Philp, has called on officers to make more use of their stop and search powers and not to try to appease campaigners who object to this. It's also announced a new £4 million investment in new facial recognition technology for use in tackling knife crime. I wonder who I'm going to go to on facial recognition technology on this particular question. Silkie Carlo.
Thank you very much. obviously quite concerned by the announcement today. Chris Philp has become somewhat of an ambassador for live facial recognition technology, which is now used in the UK in a way that we don't see anywhere else in Europe, in fact, anywhere else in the democratic world. So increasingly, on the streets in London in particular, but other parts of the country, there are cameras that in real time perform identity checks on passers-by to see if they are somebody that is on a police database, and that can be for any number of reasons. It could be because you're suspected of an offence, or it could be because you're a victim, or it could be because you're an associate of someone who's on a watch list, or it could be because you are deemed a risk of harm, which is incredibly broad, unforeseeable, who could be in that category. Sian's been fantastic. Actually, we've been and observed some of these deployments together. I think that's really important. I talk about it from a point of view of having gone to watch the police use this for 7 years now. What you typically see are police officers standing around with iPads waiting for alerts. Lots of police officers, 15 to 20 officers standing around waiting for alerts, some of which are wrong, and not doing the kind of proactive policing that I think people expect. The broader issue, though, is that the introduction of live facial recognition surveillance in this country undermines the most fundamental English liberty that we have, which is not to need to identify yourself to authorities when you're just going about your business. It's
what if it saves lives, Silkie? What if it saves lives?
Well, policing can save lives. Of course it can. Good policing, good proactive policing. I don't think standing around with an iPad waiting for someone to walk towards a police officer is going to save lives. OK, Sian, you've been a London Assembly member for many years. Big issue, knife crime in London. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, on the facial recognition, Silkie is the absolute authority on this.
And on stop and search as well?
And it is an incredibly wasteful way to not do very good policing. Okay. It's just a really, really bad idea. And it just breaks that trust. And on stop and search, yes. Yeah, I mean, earlier on, Shailesh, you were complaining about people accusing each other of racism within politics. But stop and search is a systematically racist policy. It's been shown to be that over and over and over again. When overused, it over stops and searches, over polices one particular community so badly that it led to an absolute crisis in trust in the police. And we have policing by consent in this country. So when trust in the police breaks down, the community isn't going to help prevent crime, and we've lost the whole purpose of the police service. This was realised a few years ago. There's an emergency plan put in place. Cressida Dick, the police and crime commissioner, lost her job. Mark Rowley came in to try and fix that, and there's a lot of, and suddenly it's all been forgotten about. And Chris Philp is saying, let's increase stop and search. But Sian, it's like we've just not learned nothing about what we learned, about what works.
But Sian, aren't the communities themselves saying, look, this knife crime epidemic is out of control. We need to deal with it. If stop and search is one of the tools, provided it is done in a decent, humane, respectful manner, it's got to be part of the solution, has it not?
We need people to be treated. There are more horribly violent crimes happening at the moment in these last few months, but that does not mean a knee-jerk reaction of the reintroduction of a widespread policy that is going to diminish the trust those same people have in the police to help them solve those crimes and help prevent them in the first place. It's just the wrong answer, and it's so simplistic. And I felt really sad today.
Charlie, really.
Well, there are two things. I mean, in AI in general, I do have my reservations because particularly when it comes to online harms for young people and just, having a false image and falsified image and what people, and young people particularly on social media, what they see, what they think is true, what they think is not, or they can't understand what's real and fake, it can all open up all kinds of issues.
Yes.
So I do have a problem with AI in that regard. However, I think it's the solution to the problem that we're talking about. I have absolutely no issue at all if a police officer was looking for a white male in their 30s.
But it's hardly going to happen to you, is it?
Has that ever happened?
That's the thing.
Well, it hasn't happened.
Because it happens to some people. I've spoken to people it's happened to like 8 times in 1 year.
But we have to make up our mind whether we're happy to be stopped and searched. And actually, I go to an airport, I'm happy to be patted down. In fact, it might be the only reason I turn up.
No, Charlie, I didn't know it was that kind of show.
But being serious about it, I think with the coupling of AI, and you are looking more specific, more targeting for the people that you actually suspect may or may not carry enough to protect people. But I think it's it's totally part of the solution.
Why don't Tories believe in a free country anymore? Why not? Do you want to live in an open prison? Do you want border security on the streets?
Well, Silkie, you've asked the next question. Go on, Shailesh.
These tactics are not going to be applied
Go on,
to them.
Okay.
I want our officers to
Order on the panel.
catch the criminals that are carrying knives.
Okay, come back in a second. Shailesh, go on.
On the one hand, the Tories are told that we don't care about law and order, and then when we introduce measures to effect the law and order, we're told about that it's too drastic. Let's be clear about something. There have been problems in the past. But just because there have been problems in the past doesn't mean that you abandon a scheme completely.
Well, Theresa May did.
What you do?
Well, heavily, didn't she?
What you do is you learn from your mistakes, and if it's a good system that you can moderate, you can deal with, and in this instance, we have to deal with it carefully, we have to deal with it sensitively. But at the end of the day, if there is somebody who is suspected of, say, carrying a knife or having drugs or whatever, if there's proper cause for suspicion, then I think in the interests of law and order and the rest of the wider community, I see no problems with stop and search. And I think we need to take that view rather than simply saying that, because there were issues in the past, we should just abandon it. Society has moved on. People have moved on. There's a lot more tolerance from people from different backgrounds.
You think so? Because the thing is, the reason why
is not fixed.
Well, the thing is, look, the reason why this was such a controversial issue back in the day with the sus laws was because people felt that they were being targeted unfairly and unduly and repeatedly, right? Now, the issue is, you've even got Idris Elba coming out now and saying that this is out of control, this issue. I don't know if attitudes are changing, but the danger is that you lose the confidence of particular communities and part of this fight.
But what I think we need to remember here is, what is the purpose of all of this? The purpose is to find criminals. It is to protect society.
Okay.
Let's put that right at the top of the pile of things that we need to consider, and then let's go about trying to do it. And I think if we do it that way around, rather than saying who are we going to offend, and we don't want to offend them, so let's get it right. And in terms of AI, we already have CCTV cameras that are constantly all around us wherever we go. I've just walked from the House of Commons to here, and there's probably over 100 CCTV cameras all around the place that have picked up my facial image. We have to recognise innovation. Whenever there's been massive innovation throughout history, there's always been protests.
You do need guardrails, though. But you do need guardrails as well.
I think AI, there are issues.
Okay.
We need to be careful. But I think it's the way forward, and we can't stop it. That gate is opened, and we need to just handle it properly.
Okay, we need to go to a break. It's an interesting discussion we're having. Stop and search AI. You've still got 15 minutes, well, actually 14, if you want to get your questions in 03456060973. Watching Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale with my cross-question panel. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
Ali Miraj on LBC in for Ian Dale, 8:49 Cross Question. Next question is from Janet in Harlow. It's a text question. What needs to be done to make sure those standing in our general election can campaign safely? Bit of background on this and why is this being asked? Because Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is in a critical condition this evening after being shot in an attempted assassination. Of course, within the last decade, we in this country have seen Conservative MP Sir David Amess and Labour MP Jo Cox murdered within their own constituencies. And there was also other cases, including Stephen Timms. Highly disturbing situation. Charlie.
Well, it's a great question because I think the next general election is going to be probably one of the most divisive, and probably there'll be attacks on because Keir Starmer's record as TPP. There'll be attacks on Rishi Sunak personally from both parties. I don't want to see that. I always want to see people campaigning positively and for something rather than for not just the other party. So I think there's a responsibility on all political parties to make sure that the campaigning reduces as much tension as possible. But I'm terrified, actually, when I hear about a crackpot organisation such as Just Stop Oil or whoever they are that turn up at people's homes, whether it's Sir Keir Starmer's home or whether it was descending upon Rishi Sunak's house in Richmond in North Yorkshire. That is a disgrace. Those people actually do need to be locked up because they are the ones that are intimidating and inciting fear, and I think that is wrong. But I think everybody has a responsibility to make sure that actually democracy in this country prevails, that everybody can have a voice, whatever side of the political party or spectrum you're on, that everybody should be heard, not shouted down, and we should be able just to go to the ballot box quietly, politely, and vote for who we think is
I'm all
is
for
right.
protest. I did think going to Richmond and Yorkshire and draping Rishi Sunak's house was a bit odd, quite frankly, and the fact that it could happen in this country I found deeply disturbing. Sian Berry.
I mean, this is obviously something, it's something again where there was a huge... The horrible things that happened to Jo Cox and David Amess, and this today, again, somebody going out and trying to meet the people. As far as I can tell, he was at a walkabout, and these, both those attacks were at people's surgeries. If you're going out to meet the people and you get attacked in that way, it's just the most horrible thing. And we sign up again and again to these pledges that we'll not do personal attacks, that we will respect each other in our campaigning, that we'll maintain the dignity of each other. That's something that the Jo Cox Foundation put into their pledge. And I work with a group, I support a group called Compassion in Politics, who try and get a better level of debate. And we sign up to these things and then 10 minutes later it's personal attacks, and we are all responsible for maintaining a civilised tone, because politics is what we do instead of fighting each other. It's a debate with rules that we stick to, and it's where we need to be respectful to
Sian, just briefly, do you think it's worse for women in politics? Because I mean, I speak to a lot of people who say, well, it's going to put off women. I think it's going to put off men too, by the way. But do you, as a woman in politics... If
we're talking about vitriol and personal attacks that might lead to violence, I'm not sure that is worse for women. Yeah. But there are different attacks on women that also contain misogyny, and that's an extra layer of harm that can be done.
Well, just to give you some comfort, the social attacks are also pretty bad for broadcasters as well. So we're all in it together. Silkie.
I mean, obviously the news this evening is really, really shocking, and you do think in a year when more people are going to the ballot box across the world than any other year in human history, that the tensions are really high, and especially in the American context, that's going to be really worrying. But it's worrying here. David Amess and Jo Cox, well known as being two really, really good MPs and nice people, it's tragic and unthinkable what happened. Obviously there's a public responsibility, and I think the more accessible democracy can be, the less we have of a kind of pressure cooker situation. People should engage democratically and be encouraged to do that. But for some people, if they're hell-bent on violence, you just need basic protections for MPs and people canvassing who are going out there. And I think all of the parties have a responsibility on this. And I have to say, I was quite disappointed recently, correct me if I'm wrong please, but I think I saw a Green Party councillor saying recently that we're coming after the Zionists and this kind of thing.
This kind of behaviour is ridiculous and disgusting.
It was some really concerning...
That kind of language in a very highly emotionally charged environment, we've got to be very careful of. So, thank you. Shailesh.
Well, first of all, I think what's happened to the Slovak Prime Minister is appalling. I mean, irrespective of what the politics of an individual are, if they are a public servant in whichever country, this is not the way to go about treating them. And this is basically an assassination attempt. And it is to be condemned. Sadly, attacks on politicians are on the rise. And the UK is not exempt from it. I mean, David Amess was a very good friend of mine.
Thoroughly decent man.
Thoroughly decent.
As was Joe Cox.
And Joe Cox and others before them, and they're a great loss to Parliament and to democracy. I think, Silkie mentions a good thing about politicians, behaving themselves, and I think it's important that politicians speak in measured tones as well and don't engage in personal attacks, because that gives license to the public to say, well, if you're doing it, I'm allowed to do it as well. But I think that in a democracy, clearly freedom of speech is important, but it has to be done in a respectful way.
Just in that freedom of speech point, Sian, some of the Green councillors who have just been elected have been saying some pretty pointed things in relation to the war in Gaza. Do some of those things make you feel uncomfortable?
I can't talk about individual cases because we are taking a number of cases into our disciplinary processes and we're investigating them at the moment. We always, and we're a very non-violent party. We absolutely stick to those principles.
Are you worried about entryism in your party?
Reports of hearing about violent language or threatening language, and we're very, very clear on anti-Semitism and
Sian, are you worried about entryism in your party?
Well, I think there's a lot of people joining us for lots of different reasons, and it is important that people, when they join the party,
being one of them, maybe.
Do look at our rules and our culture and make sure that we have our philosophical basis is very, very clear on a lot of things, and people don't make assumptions about what we are before they join us. But I'm very, very happy that we are growing our membership. I'm very pleased that there are a number of issues, and our stance on the war in Gaza has been very, very strong, and there are many, many people who feel like that is something that has finally pushed them over the edge because the other parties have been very poor over what has been a very, very important issue to them.
I'm sure we will watch the investigations with great interest. Let's try and squeeze another question in before we come to the one at the end. This is from Nikki in Tunbridge. It's a WhatsApp question. So Jacob Rees-Mogg says the Tory party should ask Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, he's the leader of the Reform Party, to join them, and he even wants Farage to be made Home Secretary. Does this confirm that the Conservative Party is determined to continue its right-wing lurch and no longer cares about its One Nation light blue voters? Shailesh.
Well, can I just remind Nikki and all your listeners that Jacob Rees-Mogg is one member of Parliament amongst 300 plus in the Conservative Party, and he's certainly entitled to his views.
With a public platform on another channel.
He has a platform, and politicians can have various platforms. But I think it's important to remember that one person doesn't speak for the whole party in that context, especially a backbencher. But he is entitled to his views. This lurch to the right, anything but. I'm a member of the One Nation group. As it happens, I'm also a member of the ERG. Because I do believe in the element of Britain having sovereignty and all of that. So I think, let's be measured about it.
Okay, so you're not allowing Richard Tice and Nigel Farage in. Charlie, are you?
No, I think, frankly, no. I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Any reason why, quickly?
No, I think, there are sometimes I understand why people feel as though that lurch might be needed, but you've just got to look at what I think the government is trying to do, which it will lower taxes at some point. That's what people in the right want. It will deal with the border.
It's not satisfying Suella Braverman, but Robert Jenrick.
But Boris Johnson wasn't advocating this when he won a thumping majority, and Theresa May wasn't advocating it when. Okay, not the election, and David Cameron certainly didn't in 2010. So it is the centre ground that always wins.
It's going to be an interesting battle for the soul of the party. Silkie.
Won't happen.
Okay, won't happen.
And Richard Tice actually said that he wants to.
Well, they're doing quite well on their own. I think.
He wants destruction of the Tory party.
They're doing quite well on their own.
Silkie says it won't happen.
Sian, do you care about this?
No. Can I skip this? I'm not even a party. They're just a business.
Fair enough. Understood. Okay, let's go to our fun question. This is always the most entertaining part of the entire session. This is from Fred in Stockton-on-Tees. Premier League teams are going to vote on whether to get rid of VAR, that's this virtual referee thing. What other scourge of modern life would you happily see the back of immediately? Silkie.
Live facial recognition cameras.
Very clear. Shailesh.
Twitter.
Well, it's called X now. Yeah, I could go with that. Sian?
Urban 4x4s, SUVs, long-term foe of mine.
What a surprise. What a surprise. And Charlie?
I did say the rogue cyclists. but I do think you're right. I'm actually with anyone in the Premier League that wants to get rid of VAR. I'm an Arsenal fan. It's not probably going to happen this year, but you never know. Anything can happen on the last day of the season. But VAR, I think, has been a backward step when it comes to just enjoying live entertainment football.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What a fantastic panel that was. Really enjoyed the discussion. Hope you did too. My thanks to Silkie, Carlo, Shailesh, Vara, Sian Berry and Charlie Rowley. Coming up. This is really interesting. Apparently, schools need to have flexibility to ignore age limits on sex education to counter myths or questionable content on social media, according to head teachers. Now, this is after gender guidance is due to be published on Thursday by the government that says schools must not teach children that they can change their gender identity and should avoid explicit conversations about sex until they reach the age of 13, and if they are under 9, they shouldn't really have any conversations at all about sex. And I want to ask you this question, which has been troubling me. Should children be focused on reading and writing rather than learning about sex? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Slovakia's president says an attempted assassination of the